The bad news is we have karma. The good news is we have karma. How about that? So, yes, what does this mean? What is this word called karma? We've talked about this before, but it's been a while. And certainly in the yogic traditions and in the tradition of Buddhism, this is a huge theme around what we call merit building. So our practice is there not just for our own well-being and our own sort of relaxation, but ultimately how we relate to others, how we relate to the world, is also a matter of what we bring to the world rather than what we get from the world. Um, the Greeks had this term, eudaimonia or eudaimonia. I don't know if anyone has heard this word, eudaimonia. It's largely the opposite of hedonia. If we've all heard of this term, hedonic pleasure, are things that are stimulus-driven pleasures, things of this world that fill us with some kind of stimulation, with some kind of quick payoff, if you will, such as having a really great piece of dark caramel sea salt chocolate, which I did about an hour ago, and it was a wonderful hedonic bang for my buck, if you will. And then it was gone. Now I want more, and I don't have any. So, so this is the nature of hedonia, right? There's nothing inherently right or wrong with it, but it comes with a cause and effect relationship. Cause and effect. The cause here being I had this original impulse to want to eat this chocolate. I like chocolate. What can I say? And and so of course I fed that craving, and then that led to me wanting it some more now, about an hour later. It turns out I also have an allergy to chocolate, which I'm not supposed to eat it. I do anyway. Apparently, the karmic effect is not bad enough to keep me from eating it. So, okay, this is not a stand-up routine. So, but largely, this cause and effect of feeding the stimulus-driven craving and attachment comes with an effect, and it comes with creating a tendency to want to do it again and again and again. This is largely how this theme of karma works. It's not a moral thing. It's not necessarily about good and bad, right and wrong, but it's just about cause and effect. Now, hedonia, right? Stimulus-driven things. There's no, in Buddhism anyway, there's no judgment about whether these are good or bad things, but we have to be sort of aware of our indulgences and see to what extent they're creating attachment and clinging to where if we don't have them, we suffer. And this is largely how these things are discussed. Eudaimonia, however, this other term, is really about a deeper sense of flourishing, of well-being that comes not from what we get from the world, but rather that which we bring to the world from within ourselves. Now, we may bring chocolate to the world. I happen to like that person who does this. But at the same time, I also think there is more to them than being the chocolate delivery person, or to me, to just needing more chocolate, but rather showing up in such a way that I am responding to the world in a way that has a sincere motivation for the well-being of those around me. Of course, I'm included in that. Of course, I am part of that aspiration, that wish. So this is the sort of this essence of eudaimonia, that the good life, this notion that the good life, that our thriving and our flourishing depends on the environment we create. And if you think about the cause and effect here between hedonic actions, actions that are self-serving, that serve to kind of give me kind of a boost in some way, as opposed to showing up with this other view, this motivation to be of benefit and to be skillful with it as well. It has a different cause and effect, doesn't it? So what is karma? So if we think about cause and effect, this is somehow related to karma. The word karma, the Sanskrit word karma, in Pali it's kama, Kamma. Karma literally means action. It simply means action. And it's that which, by doing something, creates a tendency to bear the fruits of that action. So again, it's at the heart of this is cause and effect. This is both, and why I said it's both bad news and good news, is that the bad news is that the tendencies to do things that we may not like or others may not like, or the things that have an outcome that in some way creates discontentedness or maybe unskillful action, um, that we then reap, sort of in some way we reap the benefits of that action. And at the same token, it's a good thing because our deeper aspiration for well-being for ourselves and others, to be in community in a way where we are nourishing, we are sort of reaching into that source of goodness, that basic goodness, that sense of kindness and generosity of spirit, and sharing that with others has a very different outcome. That also then creates what we call wholesome karma. It creates a wholesome outcome, if you will. And that our tendencies, the more we practice these things, that our tendencies tend to change as well. Now, this is not to pretend that any of this is easy or quick. Some things maybe are quicker than others, but we're always working with our tendencies, the things that we know we need to do differently, perhaps, but don't, as well as the moments where we're able to live from a moment of eudaimonia and feel the benefit that comes with that for ourselves and others, and that benefit is no longer about either me versus someone else, but it's part of the usness, the oneness of our experience together, such as a really cherished friend. Sharing an embrace with a cherished friend is very mutual. That showing up in the world in that way creates a tendency to live more in along those lines. So, in general, in Buddhism, this notion of karma is largely about the three poisons. There are these three qualities that cause most of the suffering we experience. The first is greed, or clinging and craving and needing. The second is what's often called hatred, or aversion, or ill will, right? Negative things. And then the third is ignorance, is not being able to see clearly the nature of reality as it is, but rather be projecting into it based on those first two. So these three poisons that generate our actions in general lead to unwholesome karma, right? They lead to a cause and effect where we may not reap the unpleasant benefits right away, but at some point those tendencies will catch up with us. And so we're motivated then. If we really don't like to suffer, we're motivated to change them in some way. Um, Now, the next good news is that according to the teachings, a small dose of a wholesome act holds much more power and benefit than a larger dose of an unwholesome act. That a compassionate act makes up for an awful lot of unwholesome karma very quickly. So, this is even more good news in a way, that a loving response, caring response, holds more power, if you will, more spiritual power, certainly, than having done something that maybe we were not happy about, or maybe that wasn't good for someone else. So it's not this equal measure for measure. Um, so these are just some basic ideas around this concept of karma. Again, it's not a judgment thing. And certainly, the last thing we want to do is throw around this term and say, "Oh, it must be your karma to do this," or "Oh, it's my karma to drive really fast. That's why I got a speeding ticket." Well, that may be true, um, But there is so much nuance to this. Now, the Buddha taught that we have karmas that go through past lives and that we have karmas that are waiting for us in future lives. And it can feel really overwhelming. And yet, he said, don't worry about those things. We are here to work with the karma of this lifetime. We are here only to work with what is arising in this moment. So, not to worry about eons of karma in the past, if we even believe in reincarnation, in rebirth. But really, we're here in this lifetime to attend to our circumstance now. Um, so, the good news, more good news here, despite our tendencies, despite all of the unwholesome states of consciousness that arise in us, that there can be a tendency to judge our situation as being self created or somehow an outcome of bad karma. And I've seen many people get caught in the net, in the webbing, the trap of, oh my gosh, I'm sick, or I lost my job. I have this really poor karma that I'm living out. Um, and I just don't know how to change this situation or this pattern that I have. And again, I'm not saying this is or isn't karma, but what reveals karma more than our situation is the way we respond to our situation. Because everybody gets sick at some point. The great masters, the great sort of enlightened beings have had to deal with illness. Some have died young. Um, Ramanuja, sort of the great Hindu saint, died very young. And so, we're not guaranteed a long life. We're not guaranteed a life full of health and well being, and that our merit means that we are going to be healthy. But rather, how we respond to those things is the key in Buddhism. The view of Dharma is that I work with what arises. I metabolize the situation so that I am able to ease the suffering that arises for me. And by suffering here, I'm not talking about just physical suffering, but really it's the mental anguish that comes with our circumstances, that I can work with this in some way, making the mind malleable, making my relating, turning that into something generative. So this is the step where karma, I think, really is more relevant than just sort of using a superficial understanding of it. So the next time you're tempted to say, "Oh, I got a speeding ticket. It must be my karma because I drive fast," I would say, "Okay, who's to say that a great enlightened person doesn't get a speeding ticket too? How are they relating to it differently?" There's a story of the Buddha and his followers who were sort of traveling and wandering at one point from one town to the next, and they got caught up in the monsoon season, and the thunder and the wind and the lightning was upon them, and they had nowhere to go, and they ended up wet and miserable in a barn full of sheep, and they had to eat the food that was fed to the sheep. And of course, who is it who's always talking to the Buddha? His cousin and faithful sort of attendant Ananda comes up to him and said, "All right, we get it. We have terrible karma. We're here in this situation, but why are you here? You're the Buddha. You have probably the best karma of anyone who's been born." And he said, "Look," he goes, "there's two things I want to say to you. One is I too have past karma. I too am holding past lives full of karma that I am still uh, working off of. But the second point is, I'm not suffering from it. I'm not suffering here. I'm here with you. We are here together. We have the joy of this community and of being together. And we do have a roof over our heads. And we're not happy about our situation. But, this continuous sort of fiercely loyal joy of being in Sangha and of being with the people. So this is sort of the spirit of it. Um, And so this is what I'm saying, why the circumstances, we have to be careful not to sort of judge our circumstances, but rather see, okay, how can I work with this? And I always remembered that story when I started complaining about a certain situation that I might find myself in. It's like, okay, all right, I get it. I may not be happy about it, but uh, that's the teaching anyway. So, what do we do about it? That's the question. Okay, how is karma showing up here? Impulses, tendencies, cravings, reactions, feelings, deep, deep sort of affective states that we get stuck in. Fair enough. Um, those things, the feeling states, those there's really, in a way, there's no problem there compared to the narratives that they produce for us. And so part of the key in the teachings to beginning to change our reactive habits and our patterns, the very first and probably one of the most important things is relaxation. Many of you who have taken a yoga class, who have done the final corpse pose, the pose of Shavasana, you've heard me say this before. Why is that coming at the end of our practice? Because the deep relaxation that we get is where the imprinting of the asana practice gets more deeply rooted. It gets more deeply imprinted by the relaxation. There is this sort of universal knowing that by deeply relaxing, we are imprinting ourselves in a different way than by constantly being stressed and chronically stressed and reactive all the time, which continues to imprint us in the other direction, if you will. Um, so, relaxation, this is why mindfulness, mindful breathing, deep, easeful, wakeful easefulness in the body begins to change in some subtle way this sort of karmic process of reacting and feeding tendencies that maybe don't feel terribly healthy. That includes our thoughts, what we call thought forms. The spirit of generosity that we may experience by practicing mindfulness, generosity to our bodies first, breathing in, just receiving a deeply gentle, caring breath on the inhale, holding it, cradling it gently, breathing out, and releasing is an act of kindness and gentleness. And as the body begins to relax, what arises in its place is this gentle presence. There is a different way of seeing that comes when the mind begins to settle. And these are the conditions for beginning to change those reactive impulses, to continuing the cycle, to feed those tendencies of consciousness that feed on themselves, coming back to a state of ultimately still point of awareness. In that state of deep relaxation, if we can get there, if we're able to hold the stillness, change is happening. And we have the choice and we have the opportunity to respond differently to whatever arises. This is how meditation practice, mindfulness begins to change us. It begins to work us in a very wholesome way so that our tendencies, our impulses now are coming from a place of a deeper sense of kindness, generosity. This is where karma changes, you know? And where a little bit of a good thing holds so much more power than whatever we were going through before. Because we are tapping into the underlying nature of the good heart that is there, despite the suffering, despite the patterns, and so on. So it's actually really ultimately good news, despite whatever our lives look like. Um, so this could easily be the subject of a weekend or a day retreat if we would like to explore this more. Um, And of course, there are practices. One of the meditation practices that I learned from Leslie, my teacher, one of my teachers, is a karma burning meditation, which I thought we would do a little bit of that tonight. And what that involves is allowing, first doing some basic mindfulness practice and some settling, And then we imagine that the vitality that we experience, we kind of bring attention into the base of the spine and just imagine sort of a gentle fire in that part of us. And whatever impulses, tendencies, ruminations arise in the process, we allow them to be sort of consumed by this gentle fire, this flame of vitality. And the smoke is the residue for those tendencies. What that helps us do is that imagery, it helps us to kind of ride the waves of impulses, of reactions, of narratives, and just visualize them as being this kind of smoky, well, it is smoke. So we have fire and there is smoke. So we're in a way, what we're doing is burning off the tendencies as they arise. So if there's agitation in the body or in the mind, we see it as fuel for that fire. If there is laxity, dullness, sleepiness, we see it as heaviness. And that gets sort of burned away and that goes up. So in the process of letting go of those qualities and visualizing this sort of what we might call a purification, um, we're learning how to kind of ride the waves as they arise and sort of using this kind of imagery as an anchor so that we don't have to necessarily play out the same patterns. Yeah.